Right now, somewhere outside your window, a crow is probably watching you. Not hiding, not flinching, just watching, the way it might watch a parked car. A pigeon will walk within a foot of your shoes in a park and not even bother looking up. A robin will land on your fence, feet away from you, completely unbothered. Now stop and think about what that actually means. These are wild animals standing next to the single most dangerous predator this planet has ever produced, and they've decided you're not worth the energy of flying away. Here's the strange part. There are over 10,000 species of birds on Earth. Humans as a species regularly eat about 4 of them: chicken, turkey, duck, maybe quail if you're at a restaurant that charges extra for it. That's it. Out of 10,000 options, we quietly agreed on 4 and left the rest alone entirely. That's not an accident, and it's not really about taste either. It's the result of 5 separate forces that all point in the same direction. And once you see all 5, you'll never look at that unbothered pigeon the same way again. In the early 1990s, researchers in Papua New Guinea handled a small, strikingly orange and black songbird for a routine study. Within minutes, their fingertips went numb. When they tested the bird, they found its skin and feathers were coated in a toxin nearly identical to the one found on poison dart frogs. Not venomous, poisonous. The bird doesn't bite you and inject something. You just have to touch it, or worse, eat it, and it fights back chemically. It turns out the bird feeds on a specific toxic beetle, and the toxin simply accumulates in its body over time until the entire animal becomes a walking chemical deterrent. And that's not an isolated case. European quail can become toxic too, depending entirely on what they've been eating during migration. There's an actual medical term for it: coturnism, documented as far back as ancient Rome, where physicians wrote about people falling violently ill after eating the wrong batch of quail. So even among the birds humans have decided are safe, there's an asterisk hiding in the fine print. Here's the second problem, and it's simpler than it sounds. Diet determines meat quality, and most wild birds have terrible diets by our standards. Crows, vultures, gulls, magpies, a huge percentage of common wild birds are scavengers. Their diet is whatever happens to be rotting nearby. Vultures in particular have stomach acid strong enough to neutralize anthrax and botulism, which is an extraordinary adaptation for a vulture and an active health hazard for anyone hoping to eat one. Meat from scavenger species tends to carry more bacteria, more parasites, and according to the rare people who've actually tried it, a flavor somewhere between liver and old fish. Now compare that to the birds we actually farm. Chickens eat grain, turkeys eat grain, ducks eat grain and soft aquatic plants. Clean, simple, predictable diets, which produce clean, mild meat. This wasn't really a decision humans made at all. The birds' own eating habits pre-selected them for us long before we ever thought about farming. There's actually a 5th bird hiding on the eaten list that most people never think to count: the pigeon. Specifically, squab, a young pigeon that hasn't fledged yet. Ancient Egyptians were raising pigeons for food more than 5,000 years ago, and the pigeon towers they built for it, essentially apartment complexes for birds, still stand in parts of Iran and Egypt today. Medieval Europe was covered in dovecotes for the exact same purpose. Squab never actually disappeared from the menu. It just quietly slid from an everyday staple into a rare delicacy. Which means the same species cooing outside your window right now is technically the descendant of a bird your ancestors were actively farming for dinner. The modern chicken traces back almost entirely to the red jungle fowl of Southeast Asia, first tamed roughly 8,000 years ago. Jungle fowl are low-flying, ground-dwelling, and, to put it bluntly, not particularly sharp when it comes to spotting danger. That made them easy to corner, easy to pen, and easy to breed in bulk. Turkeys followed a nearly identical path in the Americas, domesticated by indigenous peoples in Mexico long before Europeans ever arrived. Ducks were folded in through China, with a domestication history stretching back thousands of years there too. In other words, the birds on your plate today aren't simply the ones that happen to taste best, they're the ones that were, evolutionarily speaking, a little too easy to catch. Evolution rewards caution, domestication punishes it, and only the birds without much caution left ever ended up in a farmyard. Eagles, hawks, and owls are almost never eaten anywhere on Earth, even in cultures that will eat almost anything else that moves. Part of that is practical. These are lean, muscular animals built entirely for flight, with barely any fat and mostly tough, stringy muscle. Not exactly a satisfying meal. But the bigger reason is symbolic, and it runs remarkably deep. Eagles represent power and freedom across dozens of unrelated cultures. Owls are tied to death, wisdom, and the supernatural almost everywhere they appear, though not always the same way. In parts of India and West Africa, owls are still associated with witchcraft and bad omens, to the point where killing one is considered genuinely dangerous, not just impractical. In ancient Greece, the exact opposite was true. Owls were sacred to Athena, and harming one was treated as an insult to the goddess herself. Two civilizations separated by oceans and centuries, with zero contact with each other, and somehow the same bird keeps landing on the same do not touch list. That's not coincidence. That's something old, wired deep into how humans relate to certain animals. And in some places, that symbolism eventually hardened into actual law. In the United States, it is a federal crime to kill, possess, or eat a bald eagle, under a law carrying serious fines and prison time. Most songbirds fall under a separate law from 1918 that makes it illegal to hunt or capture hundreds of species, which means, technically, a single bite of the wrong songbird could make you a federal criminal over a few grams of meat. Here's the most practical reason of all. A chicken gives you a full meal. A songbird gives you maybe 2 bites, if you're generous about it. Historically, the energy required to hunt, pluck, and cook a single sparrow massively outweighs the tiny amount of food you get back for the effort. Early humans figured this out fast. Why chase 20 finches through a forest when you can raise 1 chicken in a pen and eat off it for a year? But here's the twist. Humans didn't always avoid small birds. There's a genuinely strange chapter buried in food history, centered on a tiny French delicacy called the ortolan bunting. For centuries, French diners trapped these small songbirds, force-fed them in darkness until their bodies doubled in size, drowned them in brandy, and roasted them whole. Tradition said you ate the entire bird, bones and all, while covering your head with a napkin, supposedly to hide the act from God. It sounds invented. It wasn't. It was considered one of the most prestigious dishes in French cuisine, eaten by presidents and celebrities, until overhunting collapsed the species so badly that France banned it outright in the 1970s. It's technically still illegal today, and demand hasn't fully disappeared. France wasn't alone. Victorian England had lark pie, a pastry stuffed with dozens of whole skylarks, beaks and all, served as a status symbol at wealthy dinner tables. Small pockets of small bird hunting still exist in parts of Italy today, technically illegal under EU law, and still happening anyway. The pattern repeats every time. Whenever humans hunted small wild birds at real scale, the birds simply couldn't reproduce fast enough to keep up. Either the practice got banned or it collapsed on its own. The appetite for eating small wild birds was always there. It just ran directly into extinction, and extinction won. Which brings us back to where we started. The next time a crow watches you eat lunch from a park bench without a hint of concern, or a robin hops 3 feet away without a flicker of fear in its tiny black eyes, that's not luck, and it's not an accident of nature. It's the end result of thousands of years of humans, one bird at a time, quietly deciding which ones were worth the trouble, and which ones simply got to walk away. This has been the Reasonary, where curiosity meets clarity,